The lights burned bright, hotter than anyone expected. Cameras zoomed in as Pam Bondi sat poised, that confident smirk frozen in place. Across from her, Jasmine Crockett leaned forward, calm, deliberate, eyes locked. The air between them felt electric, charged with something far bigger than politics. Then came the moment that no one watching would ever forget. $500 million, Crockett said, her voice low, steady, and sharp enough to cut through the noise. A silence swept across the studio. Bondi blinked, lips parting just slightly, like her body knew before her mind did that the secret was out. The audience didn't move. Even the camera operators hesitated, as if truth itself demanded stillness. Because in that instant, everyone realized this wasn't a debate anymore. It was a reckoning, and Pam Bondi had just been called to answer for it. Moments like this never come from nowhere. Hours earlier, the broadcast was meant to be routine. Another panel, another clash of polished talking points. Pam Bondi arrived in full control, every hair in place, every sound bite rehearsed. She was the kind of figure networks loved, articulate, confident, unflinching. Her job wasn't to inform, it was to dominate. Jasmine Crockett knew that game well. She'd seen how voices like hers, voices that carried both conviction and color, were often interrupted, dismissed or labeled too emotional. But tonight, she came armed not with anger but with proof. She'd done her homework. When the segment began, Bondi leaned in with her trademark grin, ready to steamroll through another liberal narrative. She didn't know she was walking straight into a storm. Crockett listened first. She let Bondi talk, circle, brag. Then, with the precision of a surgeon, she began to peel back the layers. Each question landed closer to home, each fact cut deeper. The studio crowd sensed it before the reveal. That shift in air, that tightening in Bondi's smile. Something was coming. Something she couldn't talk her way out of. And as the tension climbed, even the host tried to pivot to move on. But Crockett didn't move. She leaned in closer, eyes unblinking. Because when you're holding truth this heavy, you don't back down, you drop it and watch the world tremble. Pam Bondi had always been a master of performance. Long before the cameras, before the headlines, before the sound of her name became synonymous with political loyalty and selective outrage, she had crafted an image that America found hard to resist. The polished prosecutor, the righteous defender of law and order. Her tone carried authority. Her smile suggested virtue. But beneath that immaculate surface was something colder, something quietly calculated. She rose to fame as Florida's golden defender, the woman who promised justice but delivered loyalty, not to the people but to power. When she stood in front of the cameras, the message was always the same. She was on the side of right. And yet, the deeper you looked, the more tangled the truth became. There were whispers that never quite made it to primetime. Political donors whose names disappeared into paperwork, legal favors wrapped in consulting contracts, and one mysterious deal, and the one that would soon make headlines, involving a corporate partnership that brought in nearly $500 million in hidden gains. But Pam was untouchable, or so she thought. Her appearances on television, her confident interviews, her charm with both politicians and pundits, it all reinforced the illusion. America loves confidence, even when it hides corruption. To her supporters, she was elegance with teeth. To her critics, she was the smiling face of systemic rot, the kind that cloaks greed in patriotism. She spoke about law while bending it. She spoke about faith while selling access. She spoke about justice while protecting those who paid to stay untouched. And still the cameras adored her. Every headline was a redemption arc. Every controversy was spun into a misunderstanding. The system protected her because she was the system, polished, privileged, powerful. But the arrogance that builds empires also blinds them. Bondi had grown so used to applause that she'd forgotten what silence feels like. She'd forgotten that truth doesn't need a microphone. It only needs a moment. Behind closed doors, whispers turned into files, files into evidence. Evidence into the quiet determination of one congresswoman who had seen enough. Jasmine Crockett didn't come from privilege or family dynasties. She came from grit, and she had been watching Bondi for years, the way her rhetoric wrapped around money, the way her outrage conveniently aligned with her donors. And when that $500 million paper trail surfaced, Crockett knew what she had to do. For Pam Bondi, it was just another interview, another chance to lecture, to spin, to smirk. For Jasmine Crockett, it was Judgment Day. She knew Bondi's world ran on image, so she would strike where it hurt most, in front of the entire nation, under the lights where lies melt and masks burn. And as fate would have it, that day had finally arrived. Jasmine Crockett's story didn't begin under the bright lights of Washington. It began in the hum of Texas heat, where hard work wasn't a choice, it was survival. Her childhood was filled with lessons written not in textbooks, but in grit. Watching her parents stretch a paycheck, witnessing neighbors lift each other when systems failed them, and learning that fairness wasn't something given, it was something demanded. Before she ever held a microphone, she held the weight of a community that had been ignored for generations. Every injustice she saw carved something permanent into her voice. That's what made it so unmistakable, the sound of someone who had earned their truth the hard way. In college, while others debated ideals, Jasmine lived their consequences. She saw students of color unfairly targeted, single mothers working double shifts only to be treated like statistics. She decided then, she wouldn't just survive the system, she'd challenge it. Law school wasn't a path to prestige for her. It was a weapon forged for change. When she entered the courtroom for the first time, she was underestimated. Soft-spoken, young, a black woman in a world built to dismiss her. But it took only minutes for the tone in the room to shift. She argued not with theatrics, but with precision. Every sentence was evidence, every pause intentional. And when the verdict came, she didn't celebrate. She simply nodded, knowing there were 1,000 more fights ahead. That discipline, that quiet fire, became her signature. She didn't need to shout to command attention. Her power came from presence, the kind that silenced noise, the kind that forced truth to stand still. Her rise wasn't smooth. She was doubted, mocked, targeted by the same establishment she would one day confront on national television. But through it all, she never learned how to bow. And that's what set her apart from people like Pam Bondi. Bondi's power was given, Crockett's was earned. Bondi had influence built on image. Crockett had credibility built on sacrifice. Bondi's world rewarded loyalty to the powerful. Crockett's loyalty was to the unheard. So when the invitation came to appear on that broadcast beside Bondi, she didn't hesitate. She knew it wouldn't be fair. It never was. But fairness wasn't what she sought, it was truth. Before walking on set, she looked in the mirror one last time, adjusted her jacket, and whispered a quiet promise to herself. Don't let them rewrite the truth. Because this moment, this confrontation, wasn't just about Pam Bondi's secret. It was about what it meant to stand your ground when the world expects you to shrink. And when she finally sat across from Bondi, calm and unflinching, she carried with her the weight of every person who'd ever been told to sit down. But Jasmine Crockett wasn't sitting. She was rising, and she was about to make history. The segment began like every other. Two powerful women, one table and a nation watching. The moderator smiled tightly, his voice steady, but even he could sense the undercurrent. Pam Bondi leaned back in her chair, that trademark smirk glinting beneath studio lights. She had done this 100 times before. Deflect, dominate, win the soundbite. But something was different tonight. Jasmine Crockett wasn't playing by the usual rules. She didn't flinch when Bondi cut her off mid-sentence, didn't blink when the former prosecutor twisted facts into fiction. She simply waited, calm and calculating, her silence sharper than any rebuttal. Bondi mistook that composure for weakness. She leaned forward, voice rising, drowning the air with polished arrogance. Maybe if you read the documents, Congresswoman, you'd understand how business actually works, she sneered. Crockett's lips curved slightly, not in amusement, but recognition. The same tone she'd heard her whole life. The voice of entitlement disguised as authority. Pam, she said softly, steady eyes never leaving Bondi's face. I have read them. Every line. The room shifted. The moderator's smile vanished. Even the camera operators seemed to lean closer. Bondi blinked, caught off guard by the certainty in Crockett's tone. Then, for the first time all night, she hesitated. That hesitation was all Crockett needed, because she knew the truth was coming, and when it landed, no amount of polish or privilege would be able to shield Pam Bondi from it. Jasmine Crockett didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The truth had its own volume. She leaned forward, her tone quiet but unwavering. "Pam," she began, her eyes steady, "you've built your reputation on transparency, on accountability, on standing up for what's right. So tell me, how does that square with the $500 million deal you signed with Global Liberty Holdings last year?" The studio froze. Pam Bondi's smile faltered for the first time. I don't know what you're referring to," she said, forcing a laugh that sounded thinner than air. "This sounds like a conspiracy theory." Crockett didn't blink. She reached for a folder on the desk, opened it with the precision of a surgeon and slid a page across. "That's your signature, isn't it?" The camera zoomed in. Pam glanced down and for a split second her face told the story her words couldn't. Recognition, fear, then deflection. "That's a consulting arrangement," Bondi snapped. "Perfectly legal." "Legal," Crockett repeated softly. "Maybe, but ethical. When the company's under federal investigation for laundering political donations, when they're funneling money through non-profits you helped create." The audience gasped. Bondi's hands trembled just slightly. She looked toward the host, desperate for rescue, but no one moved. The silence was heavy. That kind of silence that makes people remember where they were when they heard it. Crockett pressed on, her tone unwavering. $500 million. $500 million, Pam, that's not consulting. That's a price tag on integrity. Bondi tried to interject, but Crockett didn't stop. "You sat on national television for years talking about moral values. You told Americans to trust you, to believe you stood for justice. Meanwhile, you were collecting checks from the very corporations writing the laws you claimed to enforce." Pam's jaw tightened. "You're twisting the facts." "No," Crockett said, leaning closer. "I'm untangling them." Gasps rippled across the room. The moderator looked stunned, unsure whether to cut to commercial or let the story unfold. Crockett's voice softened now, but it carried more weight than ever. "You once said that justice isn't about politics. It's about principle." "I agree with you. That's why I'm here. Because when people in power forget their principles, the people they represent pay the price." Pam looked cornered, blinking rapidly as if searching for a way out. But the truth had already sealed the door, and then Crockett delivered the line that would echo across the internet for weeks to come. "You don't get to call yourself a patriot," she said. "When your loyalty can be bought," the audience erupted. Applause, shock, disbelief, a wave of noise that crashed over the stage. Pam Bondi sat still, her expression hollow, as if the gravity of what had just been revealed finally sank in. Crockett didn't gloat. She simply gathered her papers, her composure intact, and looked toward the host. "Some truths," she said quietly, "don't need debate. They just need daylight." And as the crowd rose to its feet, the world outside that studio was already catching fire. The air inside the studio had turned into something heavier than silence, a pressure you could almost feel pressing against your chest. Kennedy leaned back, the smirk still painted on his face, but something in his eyes revealed uncertainty. For the first time, he seemed unsure of his own stage. Jasmine Crockett didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her calm was sharper than any insult he had thrown. "Senator," she began, her tone even, almost compassionate, "you keep asking why I sound angry when I talk about justice. But maybe you've never had to fight for your right to even be in the room. Maybe you've never been told your passion makes people uncomfortable." The audience was silent now. No murmurs, no shuffling, just breathless stillness. Kennedy swallowed hard. His hand twitched, fingers brushing the desk as if searching for something solid to hold on to. "You think I don't care about people?" he said quietly. Crockett met his gaze. "I think you care, but only about people who look like you." The words hit like a silent explosion. The sound crew froze. The moderator's eyes darted nervously between them. Even the cameras, still rolling, felt like witnesses to something raw and irreversible. Kennedy's lips parted as if to answer, but nothing came out. His defenses, his humor, his practiced Southern charm, it all fell away. What stood between them wasn't politics anymore. It was truth. Crockett took a slow breath and said, "One day you'll understand that justice isn't a threat to you. It's a chance to be better." And with that she leaned back, composed, almost serene. Kennedy sat in silence, his pride fractured, his certainty gone. A man finally seeing the reflection he'd spent years avoiding. The studio lights hummed softly. History once again had chosen its moment. No one moved. Not a whisper, not a sound. Even the camera operators seemed frozen mid-breath, as though the air itself refused to disturb what had just happened. Kennedy sat there, shoulders stiff, jaw locked, the reality of her words still echoing in the hollow between pride and realization. His eyes didn't meet hers again. Jasmine Crockett didn't look triumphant. She didn't gloat, didn't smile. Instead, she exhaled, slow and steady, her hands resting lightly on the table, the posture of someone who had fought this battle too many times before and learned that victory was not loud. It was quiet. It was dignity. The moderator finally cleared his throat, his voice shaking slightly. Well, I think that's all the time we have. But no one believed that was the reason. They were ending it because they didn't know what to do next. The script was gone. The control was gone. The truth had taken the floor and refused to leave. Kennedy reached for his water glass, but his hand trembled just enough for the camera to catch it. Crockett noticed, not with pity, but with a kind of deep, weary empathy. She knew that look, the moment someone's certainty collapses under the weight of their own reflection. As the studio lights dimmed, Crockett turned slightly, glancing toward the crew. Young faces, diverse faces, faces that had seen what courage looked like in real time. For them, it wasn't just an exchange, it was a message. She gathered her papers, stood and walked off set with quiet grace. Kennedy remained seated, staring at the desk as if it held all the questions he had never dared to ask. The cameras kept rolling. The silence had already said everything. By the time the footage hit social media, the internet was already on fire. Within hours, clips of Jasmine Crockett's confrontation dominated every feed, spliced, subtitled, and shared across every platform imaginable. The moment she exposed everything, one headline read, another, Crockett ends the $500 million lie. Pam Bondi's office released a short, defensive statement, something about misrepresentation and political bias. But the damage was done. The receipts Jasmine referenced were already public. Journalists dug deeper, finding contracts, offshore entities, and partnerships buried under layers of legal camouflage. What had begun as a televised debate was now the spark of a full-blown political reckoning. Meanwhile, Crockett remained calm. She didn't post victory clips. She didn't gloat online. When asked about the viral storm, she simply said, "If you stand in truth long enough, it will speak for itself." That line, raw, unpolished, real, became the quote of the week. Across communities, from immigrants who saw themselves in her courage to working-class Americans tired of corruption disguised as patriotism, people felt something shift. It wasn't just about Bondi or her secret fortune. It was about power, transparency, and the voice of someone who refused to bow. Bondi, once hailed as untouchable, vanished from the public eye for weeks. Her allies distanced themselves. Her former donors went silent. But Jasmine? She only grew louder, not in volume but in presence. She became a symbol, the kind that doesn't need headlines to exist, because her truth lived in every replay, every comment thread, every person who whispered. She said what we've all been thinking. And somewhere, behind the walls of her quiet office, Jasmine knew this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a much bigger storm.